All right, we're going to turn to the Iowa City Council work session for Tuesday, March the 6th, 2018. The first topic is to discuss an update to the annexation policy pertaining to affordable housing. So, Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Happy to be here tonight to hopefully begin the process of checking off another box on the Affordable Housing Action Plan. This discussion pertains to the annexation policy that was mentioned in that plan. IP3 of your March 1st packet has the memo from staff as well as the current annexation policy, which is incorporated into our comprehensive plan. We also included a map of annexations since 2005 in that packet. You'll note with that map that our annexations have been relatively small, I would say, especially considering the growth that the city's experienced over that time. That tells you a lot about, I think, the impetus for the growth that we've had. We've had a lot of infill development. We haven't relied as much on annexations for growth. As noted in the memo, 7 of those annexations have been for 10 residential units or more. And with annexations, it's important to remind you that the city really holds all the cards, okay? If it's in our best interest, we will annex the property. If it's not, we don't have to annex the property. Nobody can force their way onto to us. So that's important to keep in mind. As you'll see in the policy and the comp plan, we look at 3 criteria. One, is it in our growth area? And we're looking then at, can we service it by utilities without overburdening ourselves? Does it fulfill a need within the city by bringing this in? And is control of how that property develops in the best interest of the city? So our annexation policy is already pretty broad. It recognizes that these situations are unique and the city needs to look at the impact of bringing that parcel into the community before making a decision. With annexations, we already negotiate a number of topics. When you annex a large subdivision, we look at things like our need for parkland. We even think of things, do we need an elementary school site? Down to finer details where we might need a location for emergency warning sirens. So we already go through a process when we're annexing to think about all the public facilities and amenities that may be needed with that annexation. Now, affordable housing has not been one of those criteria until now, until we've started that discussion. But clearly, we can have a lens of affordable housing when we're looking at residential annexations. As we looked around to other cities, we did not find much in terms of affordable housing being specifically referenced in annexation policies. Those communities that are requiring it as part of an annexation tend to do so through existing inclusionary zoning ordinances that they have. So they have a citywide inclusionary zoning. It automatically applies when you annex a property. We don't have citywide inclusionary zoning, so we'd have to look at the policy to insert some language on that. So as we talked about it at the staff level, we really have 4 goals in mind. One would be flexibility. Each annexation is different, and we need to have flexibility in terms of what type of affordable housing do we want. Is it a single family? Is the comp plan call for single family development? Is it multifamily development? Is it being annexed into a part of the city that already has a significant amount of affordable housing? Or is it being annexed into a part of the community that has a very upper income demographic? All those factors may lead us to different conclusions on what type of affordable housing we want, not only in terms of the structure, is it apartments, is it single family, but also the level of affordability that may be best for whatever area is being annexed. consistency with other programs, whether it's the riverfront crossings, whether it's housing rehab programs, our TIF program. As we start to have all these layers that can trigger affordable housing, it's really important that there's consistency there. So when we talk about 80% median income versus 60% or 30%, I think we'd look to use some of those same standards that are already in place throughout our city regulations. A growing concern that we have, irrespective of the annexation policy, is the monitoring requirements that are coming with the affordable housing regulations that we have, whether it's inclusionary zoning or TIF. Staff is quickly learning that working with the developers to educate them on the process, verifying income, and as we look ahead, continuing to verify income for whatever that affordable housing period is, it's a significant undertaking by staff. So we would like to, as we consider future annexations, to look for solutions that do not require or have minimal staff checks that are needed to verify that affordability. And then the last one would be, anytime we are holding the cards, we'd like to see long-term affordability. When we have the riverfront crossings, inclusionary zoning, it's 10 years. I think with the affordable housing, with the annexation policy, we can strive for a longer term of affordability, and we should. So that's our fourth objective. Some of the solutions that may come to mind, I mentioned this earlier, in some areas, we may prefer a fee in lieu of. In other areas, we may prefer a larger swath of land be dedicated for a multifamily LIHTC project, low-income housing tax credit project. In other annexations, it might be individual lots in a single-family subdivision that then we could develop as a city or partner with a social service agency or a developer to provide that affordability. So all those things are really hard to anticipate because each annexation is different. Therefore, it's hard to really write a annexation policy that can encompass all those variables. In the memo, we have some proposed language. It's on page 3 of the memo, and I think I'll just read that for the benefit of those viewing as well. Ultimately, our recommendation would be for you to accept this language, and because it is a comprehensive plan amendment, that would then go to Planning and Zoning Commission, who would start the more detailed review process before it came back to you for final adoption. So the language we are looking at is as follows. If the annexation is for residential development that will result in the creation of 10 or more new housing units, the development will support the city's goal of creating and maintaining the supply of affordable housing. Such support shall be based on the goal of providing affordable units equal to 10% of the total units in the annexed area. Income targets shall be consistent with the city's existing program requirements. How the development provides such support will vary depending on the particular circumstances of the annexation and may include, but is not limited to, transfer of lots/units to the city or an affordable housing provider, fee in lieu paid to the city's affordable housing fund, and/or participation in a state or federal housing program. An agreement committing the owner-developer to the affordable housing obligation shall be required prior to annexation and shall be further memorialized, if necessary, in a conditional zoning agreement. A couple of key pieces for you to focus on there. We have said in this policy, proposed policy, this would only impact annexations of 10 or more units. Again, since 2005, the city has had 7 annexations of 10 or more units. We also have established the goal of providing affordable units equal to 10% of the total units in the anticipated units in the area that's being annexed. And then again, you heard a very flexible approach into how that is provided. Ultimately, that decision would be yours. The annexation must be approved by the city council, so if whatever staff were to negotiate while we're working with the landowner or the developer on the annexation, if that did not meet your expectations, you would have the ability to modify that, assuming the developer also agrees prior to that annexation being finalized. I think with that, I'll turn it over to you for discussion and be happy to answer questions.
Okay, well, does anybody have any points they want to make? I know I have a few, but, or questions, not points. So go ahead.
Chef, I was wondering whether you could elaborate a little bit more on the fee in lieu of. I think for the riverfront crossings, it's my understanding that if they do the fee in lieu of, those funds would have to then be reinvested in the area itself, because that was my only concern of the fee in lieu of, and I was just wondering whether that would also apply here.
I don't think it would have to apply here. You are correct for the inclusionary zoning requirement. If there's a fee in lieu of, those funds have to be reinvested in that district. But for example, the TIF policy, if we accept a fee in lieu of on the extra or the 15% out of the TIF policy, we'd have the flexibility to move those around anywhere in the city. So with this, I don't think you would be bound to do that. I also would say that what we are not saying with this is that this would be a developer choice. If the city really felt that on-site affordable units was important, then we would stick to our guns on that and work with the developer to provide something on-site. In the inclusion, that's contrary to the inclusionary zoning ordinance, where the developer can elect to pay that fee in lieu of.
I'd like to elaborate on Rockney's question and your response, Jeff. One of the purposes of our Affordable Housing Action Plan is to help the school district achieve better balance within its neighborhood schools. So if we rely too heavily on fee in lieu of, we might get ourselves in a situation where people are voluntarily annexing, they're doing the fee in lieu of, they're putting money into a pot, but we don't end up with better balance. So that's a concern I have, and your response helps me think about that concern. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it works. It would work both ways. So if we were annexing property in an area that had high FRL rates at the elementary schools, that's when we might say we would prefer a fee in lieu of, and then reinvest those dollars somewhere where there's lower FRL rates, for example. So that's the type of thought process we want to go through when we're in.
Yeah, so this is an important topic. Do any of you have any other views you want to share about it?
I think, for me, the fee in lieu should not be an option at all here, because we would like to have people who really live on that area for the affordable housing that, I've been just hearing everyone will pay the fee. Like when we give them this option, they just decide, choose to have paying the fee in lieu, and that's it. Which is this way, where are we going to build those houses? This time we're going to take the fee in lieu, and we don't know when and where we're going to build those, apartment or houses for affordable housing. And also, I think 10% is not enough. I think we should make it like 20%. And the affordability also to be like even permanent affordability, not like just during the, and the TIF policy for me for the annexation shouldn't be like, we should not use the same thing like 15% and 10% that we use it for the TIF. I think we shouldn't use that for the annexation. We should just create new policy for that, which is I propose to have like, not even long-term affordability, permanent affordability, 20% of affordable housing unit there, and also for the 60% area median income. I think we need to reduce that number and think about the people who have like really low income people, 30%. That's my recommendation for this.
Kind of along with Mazu here, I've always been a little leery or skeptical of the fee in lieu of. I always thought that it was kind of an easy out for the developers and that they're not taking the affordable housing aspect of it as seriously as we'd like them to. So I've always been a little leery of offering them that fee in lieu of.
As I listened to Jeff talk through this, the way I took his comments were that if, as a city, we feel that that's an area that we want and need more affordable housing, then we will require that as part of the annexation. But I feel like what you're missing is the fact that we do have areas of this community that have an overabundance of affordable housing. When you talk about not wanting to have people segregated by socioeconomics, it doesn't make sense to have a potential annexation, let's say, of an area where you already have a lot of low-income housing and low socioeconomic individuals living, and somebody wants to annex 120 acres, all right, and now all of a sudden you're going to add a whole bunch more low-income housing and overload schools in that area even more than they already are. To me, what this language does is, number one, it keeps all the power with the city, because, as Jeff said, we don't have to annex if we don't want to. Okay, that is our decision. That is the council's decision. So we don't have to annex. So we can get out of those developers whatever it is we feel that we want and need for that particular annexation, or we don't agree to annex it. But the idea that we should immediately have affordable housing in every single annexation, I think, ignores the aspect that every annexation is very different. And so I really like the flexibility that's in here, because we can look at each area differently depending upon what schools is it close to, what are the FRL numbers at those schools, what are the developers thinking about in terms of single-family homes or doing more missing middle or multifamily. So you have all that flexibility that we can bring to the table and get the best deal that we want, as long as we're meeting whatever our priorities are in terms of affordable housing or any other aspect. So I like the flexibility of the language with the fact that the city maintains control.
Jeff, along Susan's point, how does this intersect with our scattered site housing policy? Because my sense is that would address that if it was in close proximity to an existing area with an abundance, that I'm just wondering if we can somehow get those policies to intersect and complement one another. How would that work?
Well, we would look at the affordable housing location model when we were determining what type of affordable housing we felt was, or what type of affordable housing accommodations were most important in that particular area. So as Susan mentioned, if we're in an area that is restricted by the affordable housing location model, we may be more apt to look towards a fee in lieu of versus an area that doesn't. Now, the affordable housing location model really only gets to rental units that the city is subsidizing. I'm not sure that we would restrict ourselves based on that model, because we're not really subsidizing these units. We're just requiring them of the developer. So we're not bound to the model. And correct me if you think I'm wrong, Sue, but I don't think we're bound to the model. It's more of a resource that we would look to help guide our recommendation and your decision.
Jeff, maybe you could give a little bit of background on the 10% component of this.
Yeah, 10% obviously comes from what the standard is that we landed on for the riverfront crossings area. 10% is a widely used figure when it comes to inclusionary zoning. As you look at ordinances across the country, I don't have evidence to back this up, but I would guess that 10% is the most commonly used figure when it comes to inclusionary zoning ordinances across the country. Certainly, there's nothing to say that you couldn't do 15, 20, or any 5 or any other number, but 10 is probably the most common used number. Certainly, as that number goes up, just the financial challenges of whatever development's being proposed becomes more difficult. And it's hard to say what that means when we don't have a specific example to look at.
Yeah, because one of the reasons with Riverfront Crossings, we adopted the inclusionary zoning, was that it went along with an upzoning. So there was already, that created a significant incentive to develop Riverfront Crossings because you had the higher density upzoning that was generated. The way I'm seeing this, and we're not talking about an upzoning, I guess it might be, I don't know, but Jeff, maybe you could speak to that, but I'm not assuming we'd be seeing higher densities with these annexations.
When you're annexing, the property's not zoned because it's not in the city yet, so you're really looking to the comp plan to guide whatever that initial zoning would be. Any upzoning would probably be a comprehensive plan. So if it's calling for a single-family subdivision, the comp plan calls for a single-family subdivision, and you wanted to upzone to multifamily, you're probably going to find yourself more often than not amending the comprehensive plan before you can rezone. And I wouldn't feel comfortable putting any type of provision like that in a policy because you may not want to promise, an upzone from whatever the comp plan calls for.
So the concern always with any kind of percentage is, will developers just walk away? Developers are interested in the profit. They build to make money, and it costs money to provide a percentage of affordable housing. Now, if we had a regional policy, where Coralville and North Liberty and Iowa City were all on the same page, then, I think it would be more likely that we would see developers going along. But as long as they have other markets to build.
That's for you're talking about like high-rise building or river cross.
No, I'm talking about any.
No, I mean like you're talking about river crossing, but somebody just said it's up to us to annex area or not, to make the annexation or reject it, right? And if we ask them to do 15%, say, of affordable housing, and they said no, it's up to us. Even it's optional for us to do it, to accept the annexation or not. Mm-hmm. This is not like something that people can walk away from it or something like that. That could be true when somebody is building a building here.
But that's only, what we're talking about is a situation where a developer asks the city to annex the developer's property. So, yes, we have the right to say no.
Yes.
But if we raise that percentage too high, they will not. It's unlikely that they will ask to be voluntarily annexed. It's more likely that they'll just sit on the property. I mean, that's the concern, right?
And oftentimes, Jim, they're not sitting on the property. They haven't even bought the property.
Yeah.
Oftentimes,
Right.
they have
Yeah.
purchase agreements, and they only purchase if they can get it annexed. So, I mean, I agree with both what John and Jim are saying, is I think if we go too high with that percentage, people are just going to be looking at land around Coralville and North Liberty to annex and develop, and we won't see that growth and that opportunity for additional affordable housing via annexation.
Does this give us the discretion, Jeff, if we set this as a minimum of 10%, could staff in their discretion as part of negotiations go higher with the proposed developer, or?
We could, but I think it's really important that you set a
Clear
pretty
standards.
clear standard for a target for those developers. So I would be reluctant to tell you that we would aim higher than what the policy says. That's why I think there's a couple of key points we need to be clear on. It's the percentage, the 10% that you're discussing now, and the kind of the minimum size. We said 10 units or more. Those are really clear distinction that developers and property owners need to know upfront.
I guess for my purposes, I think in terms of the riverfront crossing standards, I would really like to see us plug into those standards both as opposed in terms of affordability as well as percentage. The process to get to those standards, I want to give a shout out to some people here. It was Scott McDonough, Glenn Siders, Marianne Dennis. I think Sally Scott was on that, and others. An incredibly thoughtful group of citizens who came together, and I think there was a lot of healthy internal debate in terms of where the affordability was going to be, in terms of where the percentage of affordable housing was going to be, and they had that debate internally and arrived at this number. And the thing about that group is that it was this broad cross-section. To arrive at that number, they felt that we could get the affordable housing and get the projects done. So for my purposes, I would like to hook into that standard, both in terms of the income affordability as well as the percentage of affordability.
I think that 10%, I just would like to see a long-term affordability. Even if we said, okay, 10%, but it have to be permanent affordable.
Yeah, on that point, Jeff, but that's one of that's the fourth of the four principles that you identified to find some way to have, I don't know, durability in terms of the affordability. What are you thinking about that? How to achieve that?
Well, and that gets back to the monitoring issue, and we wanted to avoid that the best that we could. And so we thought, our thought is right now that we would rely on a couple of different avenues. One, if it's LIHTC, we know that there's a 30-year period that's associated with the LIHTC, and oftentimes you might see the LIHTC provider go beyond those 30 years. If we were to work with a affordable housing provider like the Housing Fellowship, we don't have assurance that they're going to maintain them affordable forever, but we know it's their mission to provide affordable housing, and we should feel pretty safe and secure that if they end up selling the unit market rate 30, 40 years down the road, hopefully their organizations take those proceeds and invest them elsewhere in the community. If the city were to develop them as a public housing option, that we would be in control then, and future councils would have the ability to sell. But I would say it would be unlikely that they would move away from the affordable housing requirements. So those are the types of solutions that we're going to come to the table thinking of. What we want to avoid is the situation that we have in Riverfront Crossings now, which works fine for that small geographic area, but where we rely on the developer or the owner who's not in the business of providing affordable housing to do income verification in perpetuity. That's when it starts to overburden staff, particularly if you have a large annexation and we're now all of a sudden have to monitor 40 or 50 more units forever. That's a lot to put back on staff for verification purposes. So we would look for those partnerships or programs that have long-term affordability built in, or that we'd at least feel pretty secure on.
I guess if that's the only concern is the monitoring, just think about it, to make it affordable forever or for a long time. And for us to look for a number of the organizations to do that, it deserves the work and looking for someone like number of the organizations to look that if this will to look after those or monitoring those affordable housing. If it's for sale, done deal, sell it for affordable, and people will take care of it. But if it's not all the time, will be just rent. Some of them will be renting, some of them will be for sale. That's why this is really worth for us to invest on it and just looking at research and find if there is a number of the organization if this is something for rent, can continue monitoring those houses. But long-term affordability, it will be really great to look into it.
Yeah, because Riverfront Crossings right now is only 10, so I do go back on that. I think that's definitely too low. But other than that, I think you just presumably we could just have staff reach out to some of our affordable housing partners and come back with a number, or are we going to decide the number tonight in terms of the long-term piece of it? Jeff or Jim?
What do you mean?
In other words, we're having a discussion right now in terms of affordability, 10, 20, 30, or permanent. Are we deciding that tonight? Or is that something where we can direct staff to go and look with our affordable housing partners?
I think we're deciding whether to direct staff to proceed with
It's one or
that
10.
the statement that Jeff read, or whether we want to modify that statement in some form, but it's not a formal decision tonight. It's just directing staff to
Right.
Okay.
produce a
Basically
draft ordinance. and
Start the
then-
process with
Yeah.
planning and zoning, but the statement that I read does not include a
All those.
set time period. It does not say 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or in perpetuity. Clearly, that's a goal, and when we talk about it says how the development provides such support will vary depending on the particular circumstances of the annexation and may include, but is not limited to, transfer of lots to the city. So we're in control. We can control affordability if we own it. An affordable housing provider, that would be like Habitat or Housing Fellowship, where their mission is to provide affordable housing. Fee in lieu, where we control then how those are invested. Or participation in a state or federal program, which again already have, like a LIHTC is what we're thinking there, already has a long-term affordability requirement built into it, 30 years. That's why we specifically mentioned those. We did not mention that the developer would own and maintain, because we want to avoid that solution, that solution. So we have that goal embedded, but it's not specifically stated. If you want it specifically stated before it goes to planning and zoning, you need to give us that direction tonight.
I'd like to draw our attention to a really crucially important aspect of what we're discussing right now, and that is we're proposing to do something new. I mean, there is no annexation policy concerning affordable housing, so the very fact that we're discussing this matters. And what we have in front of us may not be ideal in terms of the number of units, the long-term character of what comes before us. Maybe there's a little too much flexibility or whatever. I mean, whatever objections I and you could think of, still, the point is, we would be putting into motion a new policy that requires affordable units as part of any residential voluntary annexation. So let's not lose sight of that.
And I think that's very true, Jim. I think what it's saying is it's showing our commitment to the affordable housing obligation that we've talked about over and over again. So, yeah, I think the language is good, and it's a good start.
I guess my preference would be that we do have more specificity on the long-term affordability for private developers. I won't want to talk about the number tonight, but my preference would be that staff does reach out to some of our affordable housing partners and come up with a more specific number. So that'd be at least my preference,
Yeah.
unless after those consultations it's totally impractical.
I too am concerned about a 10-year limit, which is the riverfront crossing situation. I think that's too short. But yeah, I like the way you put it. Reach out, explore, come back to us with a suggestion. Is that clear enough? I don't know if it is. No, I see dubious.
I think everybody's going to advocate for the longest term of the longest term of affordability there is. The question is, if you, for example, say in perpetuity, are you going to be able to pursue a LIHTC program? Because a lot of those LIHTC providers, they're bound by those 30 years, and they may extend that to 40 years or 45, but they may not be interested in a project that requires affordability forever. So then
Okay,
we might be removing
that's
ourselves
off.
from a key funding source or a key way to leverage those funds. Again, we just thought that, and maybe what we need to do is revise the policy to stress that the goal is long-term affordability without stating in perpetuity. But clearly, if you want us to engage with affordable housing providers and review this and come back to you in a work session, we will do that, and we're happy to do that. They may have some good feedback. However you want to proceed.
I guess my thought on it would be, I don't think we want to stick a number in here. Again, I think that starts taking away flexibility. I agree with the comments that the 10 years that we have in riverfront crossings is too short. We just end up potentially losing affordable housing units after 10 years, and we're just kind of restarting. So we definitely want to shoot for longer term than that. But I think as long as that is the commitment of the council, and the council is the one that votes on these annexations, then and staff acts at the direction of council, we're going to get that result for the longer commitment. And to put something in that would potentially leave out valuable programs like LIHTC, I think would be a big mistake.
I mean, I view that as a little, I mean, I hate to use the word red herring, but I think that's a little bit of a red herring because I don't think anyone has talked, I mean, Muzzy here has commendably talked about permanent, and I would love to have permanent, but I haven't seen that that's something we want to do. I would at least like to get that feedback, something more than 20, something 30 or less, in such a way that would not compromise eligibility for those programs. I don't think anyone would support a policy. My concern with council having control at this stage, developer goes through the process with staff, they come up with a number, and then we say, you know what, that's not enough, go back to the drawing board. It creates uncertainty, which I think we're trying to avoid. So I would at least like to have them have that conversation. I don't think it would take that much time. At least I'm hoping it wouldn't.
No.
They can come back for relatively short. So at least that's my position on that.
I just want to ask you for the history of the annexation in Iowa City. Have all those been like for rent, like residential for rent or for sale?
It's not something that it would be up to the owner. So I couldn't answer that. When we go through the annexation, we don't specify whether they're rental or ownership. Sometimes by the nature of the housing that's provided, if it's multifamily, you could assume it would be rental. If it's single family, you could assume it would be owner occupied, but that's not always the case. And those annexations that you're seeing on that map are also annexations for non-residential property too. So there's office annexations. There's, I think, a Terry Trueblood Park is on there that we annexed. Those aren't all residential on there, but we don't always know that at the time of annexation. We can get the developers' thoughts going into it, but developers may change based on the market. If it's a strong rental market, they may rent more. If it's strong seller's market on the single family, they may sell.
All right,
Yes.
I want to walk folks through 3 questions, and let's see if there is majority support for specific answers to these 3 questions, knowing that this will just go into a proposed ordinance that will be processed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and reviewed by the public and interested parties, et cetera. So the 3 questions have to do with, shall we permit the use of fee in lieu of? The second is, do we want to require 10% or some larger number, 15 or 20, in terms of the number of affordable, or the percentage of units that are affordable? And the third would be, do we want to put anything specific in there with regard to the duration or time limit for the affordability matter? And if so, what number do we want to propose, if we want to propose any specific number? Okay, so the first question, who supports the idea of authorizing the staff to use fee in lieu of as one of the alternatives to, when discussing a proposed annexation? So who's in favor of that? I see 3 hands up.
I think we need flexibility, folks.
Yeah.
Here's my thing on that. I would support it if there were more specifically defined criteria to limit discretion as to when it was used, based upon sort of what we talked about before. So I could support it, but I would want to make sure that there are specific criteria, because what I don't want a situation is where we have this, as we've talked about earlier, and we end up further aggravating the socioeconomic disparities that we have in the
Yeah, good
community.
point. So, Jeff, is there some way that language could be revised? I mean, because, so we're all very clear about this, one of the purposes of our Affordable Housing Action Plan is balance, to help the school district achieve balance among its neighborhoods. So
We would probably just refer to the affordable housing location model. And so if it's an area that would otherwise, if the city would otherwise not subsidize rental housing in, then we would allow fee in lieu of.
I guess I'm comfortable with that, because that would then allow us to invest in another part of the community. And if it wasn't affected by the model, well, then it should be there, right? I mean, because it's not already part of the model. So I guess I would be cool with that.
What if you had, though, an opportunity come before you where somebody wants to annex a piece of property, and at the same time, it's not necessarily an ideal spot. Maybe it fits the location model, but there's an opportunity for a great land banking situation, where that might be, an area that you've always wanted to get some land because there's not much affordable housing in that part of the city. And for some reason, somehow, something comes up that here's an opportunity. You got this annexation on this hand where they've got to give us money fee in lieu of, or do the affordable housing, but you have a more ideal location over here, but you don't have the money for it. I'm really concerned that you start putting these limitations in and you limit flexibility, and you don't give the staff or the council the opportunity to make the best decisions based on the circumstances at the time.
Yeah, and maybe as I'm thinking about examples where you may want fee in lieu of in other areas, let's say we had an annexation for a single development, a 100-unit senior housing provider. And so the annexation policy, we would look at that and say, okay, you need to provide 10% of those units as affordable. And the provider, typically the senior housing providers are national providers with their own operational models. They may not have mixed income desires or within their business model. So in that case, you're annexing one building that's big. It has, maybe it's assisted living or something like that. That's another situation where, irrespective of where it's located, vis-a-vis the affordable housing location model, we might consider a fee in lieu of, because we might say the value of 10% of those units could be better invested somewhere else, while you still have a singular senior housing provider in this area. It's just one more example of
What do
some
you
of the
mean
thought
by
process.
if you don't have what you said, like the mixed income?
So in a provider of senior housing that may not, they build the same model everywhere they go in 50 cities throughout the country. They may be unwilling to have an affordable housing component to their product.
They don't want to. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Their model, yeah.
We see that with a lot, the Foster Road annexation that you have before you, that you had, now you're into the zoning stage. That's a senior housing provider that doesn't have an affordable component to it. In that case, we might take the fee in lieu of. That's just.
Well, we just don't annex it. We need to have, like, somebody, if they came to our city, they have to be welcome to all the people from different income. And if they don't want to do it because that's their model, go somewhere else and do it. In our community, we prefer the people who come here who understand our model.
Yeah, that's your decision
Yeah.
as a policymaker. I'm just trying to give you examples of where fee in lieu of might be appropriate.
I guess I can't support it unless there's more language specifically preventing, and I'd leave it to staff's discretion and to come up with that language, preventing the concern that we've identified, that all of a sudden we find ourselves not addressing one of our concerns in terms of balance throughout the community. So at least based upon the language now, I would be a no for fee in lieu of, unless and until there's more clear language identifying that concern.
Yeah, I'd express it differently, Rockne. I think what I personally would like to see is that the staff adopt some language that clearly indicates we want them to give considerable weight to the concern about helping the district achieve better balance when deciding whether or not to use fee in lieu of. So it still leaves a lot of discretion in the staff's hands, but draws attention to that key question about balance among the neighborhood schools. Instead of 11% FRL rates and 78% FRL rates, maybe we can modify that at the margin with our policy.
I think
That's
we
what
can.
I'm thinking.
I think we can come up with language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is This seems to me like a pretty good start. I mean, we're not at the end of this process. We're at the beginning of it. It will be going through planning and zoning.
Right.
It will be fully vetted through that process. I think we've identified the key variables. So, I mean, Jim, I think your 3 points we should go through, but personally, I think this seems like a fairly good start, and we're having a good conversation in terms of raising concerns. But that's why we have the planning and zoning processes. It will give us and the community time to discuss these variables in more detail before it comes back to us.
All right, so given the caveat I just identified, are we, enough of us comfortable with fee in lieu of?
If the language is there, yes.
I'm not.
All right, well, I see 5. All right, so.
Like Rockne says.
Yeah. All right, so
We'll
you're good to go
revise
on
some
that?
language.
All right. So the second had to do with basically the percent of units that would have to be affordable. So you've proposed 10%?
And I propose 15%.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with 10. I think John made a really good point that we did the 10 in the riverfront crossings where we were upzoning, so we were giving them greater density, okay? In this case, you could say that you're giving them something by allowing them to come into the city and get city services. In exchange for being a part of the city and getting city services, they have to provide the 10%. I think it keeps it kind of in line with what we did there, and I think it also hopefully keeps the financial aspect reasonable, too, in terms of making it work for everybody.
Well, the other thing I like about the 10 is that the developers that now have gone into the riverfront crossings are familiar with the standard, and they can communicate to the future developers, hey, this is a workable standard. And again, for the reasons I previously discussed, I'd support the 10.
Yeah, I think, again, for the time being, I'm supportive of 10. I mean, I've just recently been reading about Portland, which is a very hot market in terms of real estate. And they've enacted a citywide inclusionary zoning requirement. And there are indications that development is slowing down. So you can end up hurting your cause. 15% of nothing is nothing. So the key is, how do we develop cognizant of the market we're working in so that we are generating units and not causing development to choose to go somewhere else. So it's a balance, and I don't know where that balance is, but I'm for the time being, and we can, this will go through the P&Z process, as Rockne said, with Riverfront Crossings, which was one of those sort of Portland situations where we were creating a huge incentive to develop there. There is a risk that we will set the percentage too high, and I am concerned about that.
But if we have like citywide inclusionary zone, we can just say 10%, even less than 10%, but we don't. And that's why I'm saying, and even if we have permanent 10%, I can say yes, 10% for like permanent affordability, which will be great. Even less than that, it will be 7% permanent. But this is going to be for 13th time. But, looking ahead, suddenly you're going to see that area either like being fair and low and no affordable housing there, or like 10 years, everything gone, and we're going to start doing the affordable housing option again and again, and this, crisis never going to end.
So that leads us to the third decision I think we have to make. Sorry, I think I'm going to support 10% myself, so there's support for that.
Consistency, I do.
Yeah, of course.
And then it'll be reviewed and processed by the vetting process we've already specified. But that leads us to the third point, which has to do with duration or the length of the requirement. I think 2 years, 10 years is too short. I don't like it in the Riverfront Crossings District. I think we need a longer period. In perpetuity is just beyond, that's too much, too long. So I want to put out there, just to have a conversation here, 20 years as the period of time that we would want the units to be affordable. And then it'd be processed. I don't know if I would actually end up voting for 20 or 15 or what, I don't know, but a longer period. So what do the rest of y'all think?
I think duration is the key, one of the key variables. And I like your suggestion of 20 as a starting point. So, yeah, I mean, that's the one that worries me the most, is creating affordable housing and then watching it evaporate. So I think there are a number of strategies, aside from inclusionary zoning, that we need to be looking at in terms of, that notion of affordable by design, regulatory controls which will reduce the cost of developing housing. I mean, that's one of the key issues that we face in affordable housing is if our standards do not generate it, we have a disconnect there. So we need to develop standards which promote affordable housing by design as well. But I do think, where we are earmarking 20% seems like a good starting point.
20 years, you mean?
20 years.
Did I say 10?
You said 20 years.
20%.
Or you said 20%.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 20 years. Sorry.
10%, 20 years.
I would go along with the 20 years, because if we're talking long-term affordability, I agree 10 years just really doesn't seem long enough, and 30 is maybe too long, and with light tech, et cetera, 20 years I think would be good.
But let's see, but we would not want to require always 20 years, right? A LIHTC project might actually be 30. Yeah.
I mean, something like, preference is 20 years minimum, or, something that's, I'd rely on staff to come up with some language that they think might, and again, P&Z is going to go through this, but I don't want to see us starting over every 10 years either.
Yeah.
I think that's an issue, but I'm concerned about setting things in stone that then don't give us, we get down the road and there's some really good opportunity and we don't have the flexibility that we'd like to have.
And I would imagine with the language, we could construct a language in such a way that, that we would ensure that it's 20 years and would make sure that it doesn't conflict with other eligibility for federal housing programs or something. Unless it conflicts with those programs. The other thing I would say is, I think we're all sort of looking for that Goldilocks number, that perfect number. 10 is too low, permanent, I think for me is too much. I would like the staff to reach out to our affordable housing in terms of coming up with a community in terms of getting that number. So I guess at least for now, I'm not supportive of 20 years. I don't want to decide that tonight. I would prefer that we request staff to reach out to that community with hopefully that we would get up to that 30-year number.
Moss, do you have a view about this?
Permanent.
All right, but I think I heard 4 people express support for 20. And again, this is a tentative proposal that's going to be processed. All right, there's one very minor change I'd like to recommend in the draft you gave us, the paragraph. And this may turn out to be irrelevant given our conversation, but let's see now. In what is this? The second sentence that begins, "Such support shall be based on." I'd like to suggest removing the words "a goal of." So, in other words, what it reads right now is such support shall be based on a goal of providing affordable units equal to 10% of the total units in the annexed area. Except,
But if it's in fee in lieu of, your calculation of that fee in lieu of may be related to that 10%.
well, so I was just going to suggest changing it to such support for the goal that's described in the first sentence. Such support shall be based on providing affordable units equal to 10%, or whatever the percent is, of the total units in the annexed area. And then it goes on to provide flexibility. So it's...
But what if you do decide to take fee in lieu of, and you're buying land for land banking, you may not be able to equate that to exactly 10 units, equal to 10 units of.
Well, yeah, I was trying to be clear that the principle would be, just using this initial language, the principle would be 10% of units shall be affordable. But then there are a variety of ways of doing it. I don't want to make it sound like 10% is a goal. That's pretty ambiguous, it seems to me.
And what about the like affordable housing affordable to tenant at which level? Like, I see a 60% for the median income for the renter and 80% for ownership, home ownership. You know, I just would like really to see low numbers in that so we can include like people.
Can we come back to that and try to answer the decide whether you want to make the little change that I just suggested? Just decide that first,
Okay.
and then we come back to you, Maz.
Of deleting on a goal, that those.
No, deleting the words "a goal of."
Goal.
And you know, my concern is that having those three words in there makes it sound as if the percentage requirement is in itself merely a goal.
It does sound discretionary, Jim. I agree. I would support your change.
You already said in the first sentence that the goal was creating and maintaining the supply of affordable housing, so it's kind of redundant then to say that here's the other goal, providing. So I would agree with that.
That's fine, to take it out.
Okay, so there's support for doing that. Maz, you have a suggestion. Could you state it again, please?
I said I would like to see lowering the number of the tenant who will occupy this. I say like affordable to tenant at or below 60% of the area median income, and homeowners at below 80%. Just by looking to the census data of how many people we have in this community, we have like over 2,000 families that paying more than 50% of their income, toward rent and utilities. Just by going back to the city census about this, we need to lower this number. We need to maybe make it like 50, 40, and for the homeowner could be like 60.
Oh, okay. So instead of saying 80% of area median income for owned structure units and 60% for rented units, you want both of them lowered. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
And
because
you want them both
by just-
lowered to what? What percentages?
I would love to see like 30, 40 on the renter, and I would love to see like really 60, 50 on the ownership.
Okay, so there's a proposal before us. What do y'all think?
I'm not in favor of it, and we have that flexibility to do that, but my concern is, you mentioned earlier, Jim, we're doing something we've never done before, even to start talking about affordable housing being tied to annexation. My concern is twofold. You start putting requirements in here that are more expensive for the city, developers, housing providers, than anything we're already doing in the city. And the opportunity that we're going to have for any annexation is, why would somebody annex property when they could do something in the city, in riverfront crossings, other places that is less expensive than what this is going to do? I think we have to, it says the income targets will be consistent with the city's existing program requirements, and I think it's reasonable to keep them consistent. I don't think you want a bunch of different guidelines and different requirements in different parts of the city. I think we want to keep it consistent. I think we need to look at opportunities to offer for people with lower incomes, definitely.
LIHTC certainly would.
Yeah, LIHTC certainly does.
And those numbers are consistent with other, across the country and across the state, use those same basic numbers.
LIHTC does,
Right,
yeah, because that's
right.
federal, state and federal money.
Right.
And I know I'm sounding like a broken record on our mythical committee here on Riverfront Crossings, but I really do like the fact that they really looked at this from all the angles over a period of time, did the analysis, and came up with its numbers. And they had this strong internal discussion with affordable housing. I'm sure Mary Ann was pushing for 30, but they came to these numbers. The development community is getting used to them, and let's keep on that path.
John, Pauline?
Yeah, I think, again, we're talking about new development with annexation. New development is always expensive, so again, I'm hoping we can try to develop standards to reduce that cost, but the 60 and the 80, I think, have been kind of vetted with respect to that, that it's difficult with home ownership to go lower than 80% because you may not be able to get a loan. So there are a number of things that come into play with lowering these numbers that I think did go through a process with riverfront crossings and establishing those numbers as workable. The 30% is a huge issue. I agree with you. You're talking about people with households with very low income. I think that's kind of the way I'm viewing that as a special condition that needs to be looked at with other remedies, with special remedies. Because from a market standpoint, that I just don't know how that works. I think it's extremely difficult in our market system to make it work.
I agree. 'Cause I think we've gotten literature about that as far as that makes it very difficult for these folks to even get a loan to get it in the first place. So I agree with John.
So do I hear preference for keeping it at 80 and 60 for this tentative? So that's what we're going to do here. Okay. Okay, so any other points anybody wants to make with regard to this annexation policy amendment?
I just want to commend staff for, I think, a very thoughtful, new groundbreaking policy.
Would you
Yeah.
like to see this revised language again before we send it to P&Z, or are you comfortable with us making changes and getting it in front of P&Z?
I'd say make changes and send it to P&Z.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
My vote would be to see it, so I'm only one vote, so.
Okay, given the time, I want to
50 votes.
suggest that we skip the strategic plan discussion till after the formal meeting. All right, so unless there's objection to that, let's turn to clarification of agenda items.
I just had one, and it had to do, was on the consent calendar, on the Frauenholz, Miller. The numbers didn't quite make sense to me, and I'm not finding, there was an increase in what the cost of the project came in at, and over what was awarded, that didn't seem to match up with the change orders.
Sorry, I don't have the change orders in front of me, but the additional cost had to do with the sodding that we ended up having to do at that park as part of the
Oh, okay.
project, and then some of the footings with the shelter we ran into with placement on that, so.
Okay.
We can take a look at that between now and the formal. If Julie or Jason, you can pull that, we can get some clarification.
Yeah, one thing I would mention with that is those were existing bid items, and so it was an increase in quantity versus requiring a change order for adding items. So it was an increase in quantity versus an increase in items. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that satisfy that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I had a question also for Jeff on 4D6 with the police officer grant overhires. The final sentence said be increased by temporarily adding 2 full-time police officers. So as those grant-funded positions go away, will you just by attrition then sort of work into that? You won't just automatically
Correct.
get rid
no.
of 2 positions?
Yeah, there's no layoff. So once those grant funds end, you're right, the next 2 employees to leave the department, whether retirement or another job or whatever they choose to do, we just wouldn't fill those positions.
Is there a possibility that we might continue those specialty kinds of things, like for the domestic violence programs, et cetera?
Yeah, a lot of, like, for instance, the domestic violence grant, a lot of what that provides for is training for our investigators and for the community. So some of the victim advocates and social service agencies will also benefit from that grant because we'll be able to do joint training with our department. So it's not all about a person dedicated to the issue. It's about education for the entire department and the community. But certainly we hope, and this should be the case with anything that we do along these lines, if we're getting a grant, whatever skills we learn, whether it's Invest Health or this particular grant, should carry on well beyond the term of the grant. If not, we're not doing things correct.
Thank you.
Plus, there is an officer already dedicated just to domestic violence. I'm not sure if you realize that, but Scott Stevens, that's a full-time position already.
Any other agenda items? I'd like to make a quick comment about a piece of correspondence, item 4F1, which is a request for an interview coming from Andrew Wendell. And it has to do with alcohol and, I don't know, where's Simon? Oh, sorry, I couldn't see. Alcohol and crime and incidences of this and that. And Simon provided a lot of really detailed information. I've shared it with Andrew Wendell, and he and I are going to have a conversation and a short interview for his research project. Just wanted to let you all know that. And thanks for doing that, Simon. Okay, I guess we'll move on to the info packet. February 15. Urban wildlife deer might be a good one. IP number 8 in the February 15th packet. So Liz, is Liz in the audience? Thanks for providing us with the memo and then all that background information that Sue provided, right? Who knew? I should know. I mean, it happened right after I left the council 20 years ago, but nonetheless. So, is there anything you want to say to us before we try to figure out how to proceed?
I'm here to answer questions for anyone. I know you have history in your packet that Sue provided. Everything that has happened previously was a little before my time, but I understand that a task force was created, including experts and a lot of public input, which is exactly what National Resource Commission is still looking for today when they look at municipalities that are requesting deer management zones or special harvests. They want public input, and they want to know that you've really done your research and consulted your wildlife biologist and things like that. So, yeah,
okay. So we've received correspondence about this, including one very lengthy petition signed by, I don't know, 50, 60 people. I didn't count the number. And we've received correspondence before, which drew our attention to this particular issue and which led us to ask staff to collect some information and all that. It seems to me pretty clear we need to take action. Perhaps contracting with an entity like White Buffalo to cull the herd, perhaps. But it seems to me also that it might be wise to revive the deer task force. There is a need for some kind of periodic review of the status of the deer population and, whether it's grown too large and something needs to be done. But I'm wondering what you folks think about this, because we need to provide staff with some guidance. And Jeff, did you want to add anything into this to help us get this discussion going?
I don't think so. You have the history there. I think we have a tight deadline if you want to do something this fall, and I'm not sure it's realistic to think we could do something this fall if you want to really go through the robust public input process, which is called for on an issue like this, and which some of you probably recall from living in the community 10, 15, 20 years ago when this was a very hot topic. So unfortunately, we have that pretty tight deadline for any type of action this year. So it's probably the first discussion you need to have is, do you see this as an extremely urgent issue where we need to work towards getting something in front of the DNR by April 15th? Or do you want to take a slower, more methodical process, and whether it's with the Deer Commission or public input sessions, hear some feedback from the community?
I feel there's some degree of urgency to it. We have received a lot of reports on this. And you think about, I wish we would not have to do it, but I think the paramount consideration that we all have on council is public safety. And this is a public safety issue, especially given our proximity to Interstate 80, the other major 4-lane highways. So I think we need to move forward with it. I know it was extraordinarily controversial. We may take some heat for this one, but I think it is something that we need to do. But that said, so I'd like the expeditious, that's my vote. But I also think in terms of the long term, if we could have a parallel track to the extent that'd be feasible for because I'm always, I know we're all public input people. We love that process. To the extent that's feasible, I'd like to see a parallel track on that, but not to the extent that it would delay the April 15th deadline.
I would like to hear maybe from Liz would have some ideas on this as far as a relocation alternative besides a kill method. Do you have ideas on that?
I can answer that question as best as I know, but I'd like to address the timeline just to make sure that it's clear that the Natural Resource Commission considers DMZs, they call them deer management zones, and they are otherwise known as bow hunts. And there are bow hunts conducted in a variety of cities and counties all over Iowa. And that is the April 15th deadline, if that's what we choose to do. And there are so many of these DMZs out there that the city manages. In most cities, it's police or fire or something like that because of the nature of what's being done. But so putting together that kind of process to get that approved, we would be able to use some of the plans that are already out there and look at what other cities are doing and things like that. But if the council decides to go with sharpshooting, which was done historically for a number of years, that's a little bit of a different process, and that goes in front of the Natural Resource Commission, not through the DNR. We go right to the commission in Des Moines, and we need to get on their agenda to do that. And I think that's going to take quite a bit longer process to get that done. So I wanted to make sure I address that. And to answer your question about alternatives to rehoming the deer or sterilizing them, I've tried to read as much as I possibly can in the last couple of weeks about this issue, and I'm not a wildlife biologist, but my understanding of wildlife and how the humans tend to relocate it, that the survival rates of animals that are relocated is really very low. And anytime you take a species, whether it's a raccoon or a deer or a bear, and you take it out of its territory, the survival rate just plummets. And so removing the deer and putting them somewhere else isn't really the best solution for the deer, either, even though it seems to be the most humane, and it sounds like the nicest solution. It doesn't work for the deer. And I've just read as much as I can about sterilization, but I wouldn't be the person to answer that. Really, it's almost a wildlife biologist that we need to ask that question, if it would be something that would be feasible in this area or so.
Thank you.
So I want to be clear about the timing part of this. If we thought that it would be good to do, if we thought it would be good to cull the herd by hiring some firm and using guns, basically, to cull the herd with, how long would that take?
Well, that process, the National Natural Resource Commission calls that a special harvest. And we are actually the only city, the only municipality in Iowa that has ever done that. And so they don't actually have a set process for that, like they do for the DMZs, deer management zones, otherwise known as bow hunts. There's more of a timeline and process has been set up for years for those because they're so common. The sharpshooting is a real anomaly. So the commission, we would have to go in front of the commission in Des Moines, and so they would put us on their agenda. So I believe that their April meeting is the second week of April, and I think they start working on the agenda about 3 weeks before that.
Well, my preference is to try and get the approval for White Buffalo or some other organization to come in. I think when I look at the pros and cons that are in the memo in terms of the bow hunting versus sharpshooting, the amount of time that it takes to actually get the numbers down through bow hunting can take years. The thing that I really liked about White Buffalo when we had them in before is this is a group that knows what they're doing. They are highly trained. I think a lot of them were ex-military sharpshooters, as I recall. They have an incredibly high standard in terms of, they have like a target on the deer the size of a quarter, and if they miss it, they were in trouble. I mean, they drop them as one shot, the deer's dead. No, I won't say no suffering, but as little as you can possibly have. The idea of, I grew up in a family of hunters, but the idea of a deer running around with an arrow sticking out of it, I think you got a lot more wounding and suffering with people, amateurs out there, even if they're having to do some testing that they've got some proficiency with a bow and arrow. I would rather have it done that with the sharpshooters. So I would rather see us start the process with the DNR and see if we can get we've done it before. And how many years did we do it before? Maybe it told in here, I
think
forget.
the first year was 1998.
Yeah.
And they went until 2010 was the last year, winter of 2009-10.
And missed just maybe 1 or 2 years in there that we didn't do it or something. But yes, we did it for quite a few years. And I don't know if we had to get approval every time, but let's see if our luck holds and go back.
Yeah, tell me if I'm remembering a couple bits of information correctly. I think in your memo you say that a January 2018 report from White Buffalo indicated that it had conducted a count, and those counts are probably 3 times as large as they were 10 years ago, and what they call a density similar to what was present when we initiated the sharpshooting program in 2000.
Yes,
right?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so the numbers are pretty large. And we've gotten a lot of complaints from people. It sounds to me like we do need to act. I think sharpshooters is the way to go. I do believe we need to reconvene a deer task force, though. So we might get a little bit of have preliminary steps taken about that, Jeff, in terms of trying to identify who the members might be or the type of expertise that would be involved, and we have historical experience to go on there, and what the purpose of the deer task force would be, because there's this history now of 10 years or whatever of ebbing and flowing of the deer task force, and I guess Sue knows that pretty well.
But I do like Rockney's point of trying to do that parallel of not waiting to get a deer task force in place before trying to get on the agenda.
I guess I would ask if as a council, and I don't know if you're there yet, but I'm going to assume a little bit, if as a council you decide you want to do sharpshooting and that you want to take action this year, what are you really asking for the task force to provide?
I'm only asking if the DNR is going to come back and say, have we done this? We can say we're in the process of doing it, and we'll complete it before we actually bring White Buffalo in.
Okay.
I think, it's a completely appropriate question, Jeff, but I think one aspect is that we need to have some continual review or assessment of what's happening with the deer population.
So,
instead of going 10 years and going, oh my gosh, it's now 3 times as large as it was way back when.
that makes sense. Beyond the current set of decisions on whether we take action, it's more of a long-term commitment.
I mean, my question is it sounds like there are lots of these zones all over Iowa. What are the cities where these zones are located? What are their practices with respect to managing the situation do they have task forces as we were discussing, or what? I mean,
But those are all bow hunting.
They are all bow hunting, and of all the cities that I made contact with and talked to the people who are managing the program, they have been doing it for a number of years, and their numbers are at a manageable level in those areas.
So,
I don't get the sense that they have to have a task force because they're continuing to do the management every year.
So that seemed, I mean, as a strategy, trying to get the numbers down through sharpshooting and then allowing hunting, why is Iowa City the only place that has gone the sharpshooting route? I mean, I don't know. I don't have much background in this area, but
I think that's a useful question, and we have a history of this, and so I think Sue or others could provide us with an explanation as to why the councils back then made the decision they made.
Yeah, the task force back then, or the committee, I mean, they looked at the humaneness of it, and that was it. They felt if you're going to cull the herd, that was the only way to do it, and that bow hunting just was not acceptable, and that was it. Plus, it's expensive, and
Yeah.
perhaps other communities were not willing to do that, but the city was. But that's really what it came down to, was the humaneness.
Sharpshooting, I'm supportive of that.
All right. Do you have enough clarity about what we think?
Yeah, let's make sure. You want us to initiate efforts with the DNR, the State Commission, this year with the intention of trying to do something this fall, if possible. We don't know if that's possible yet. And at the same time, try to reconvene a committee to not only help inform us with this year, but perhaps check in once a year, twice a year to study the issue so we don't lose sight of it going forward.
Yeah, that sounds
More or
right
less
to me.
correct? Okay.
All right, thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
It's 18 minutes till 7. Why don't we adjourn this work session and come back to it after the formal meeting?
Sure.
The moment where we would begin reviewing the draft 2018-19 strategic plan. I want to draw your attention to a document that Kelly circulated on my behalf. Thank you, Kelly. And it's the one that has yellow and blue on it. So this is basically the same document that staff presented to us in our packet, with one modification, basically. It's my effort to edit the draft in minor ways that I think are minor but make a difference. So everything that's marked in, it looks like dark blue, is material I would recommend that we add, and everything that is crossed through is material we would delete. So I don't know if you've had a chance to read through this, so
No.
if not, all right. So what I'd like to do is just go through it, maybe item by item. I think it'll be quick. But I should emphasize, regardless of the edits, the bottom line question is, do we feel good about this proposed strategic plan? Or is there something that needs to be modified in any significant way? This is our shot. And I'm not saying there is anything that needs to be modified really significantly, but this is our moment to do that. So going through the minor edits, right on the first page, under the line step 1. Ashley, yeah, under the lines that says step 1, confirmation of whatever. Yeah, so I'd recommend that we include the verb foster a, instead of just have the words, a more inclusive, just, and sustainable Iowa City. Y'all have heard me talk about this before. I think the verbs matter.
Sure.
And then scrolling down under the, it's harder to read on the page, Ashley, because
Yeah.
the blue is darker than that is. But if you scroll down to,
Trying to be able to edit this, it's not,
oh, you're trying to edit? Well,
election is.
I can take notes, Ashley.
Yeah.
It looks like there's a license issue.
I haven't, well, let me see, it may just be that particular section, but yeah, I have a second copy here. It doesn't have the marks that you provided is the only thing, so.
No, Ashley, just work off the mayor's, and I'll take
Okay.
notes, and we can catch
Great.
up.
We will do that. Okay. I will go
all right, so you
where
can scroll down a little bit farther. Yeah, in, what is that?
Section 2.
Paragraph 2B or whatever. I'm suggesting deleting the words after,
Adding.
adding the words after consulting with stakeholders. I know we had a conversation about the point about creating an historic preservation district downtown, and it would appear that we were already saying we were going to create an historic preservation district. I think I wanted to put language in there that would indicate we're going to consult with people about that, and
That's
and then-
fine. I would
and then
just
decide.
Yeah, I would just encourage staff to wordsmith that maybe a little bit, because I'm not sure it's a grammatically correct sentence.
Yeah,
Once those are in,
Yeah,
so just-
I'm
yeah.
fine. Sure, I'm fine with that. And in 2C,
Excuse me,
Yeah,
there is
sorry.
a typo under B, that far part on the last line. I think it's
Far part of the
four
downtown.
part.
Part of the downtown.
Yeah. For part of time.
well, it might be the far part of town.
Yeah, right. The far end.
Good eyes, John. All right, and then in 2C, I'm suggesting, well, this is really trivial, suggesting just putting in the cities instead of in the community at the end of that sentence.
It's fine.
Fine.
In item 3A, that is, I don't think we were suggesting adopting a new affordable housing action plan. I think we were suggesting modifying the affordable housing action plan. So that's how I changed the language to indicate modify the existing affordable housing action plan to include new strategies, et cetera. And then to add at the end, especially for low to moderate income households. So you might want to read that whole sentence to see if you're comfortable with that.
It's good to me.
But isn't all affordable housing for low to moderate income housing? I mean, households? I mean, it's not going to be for high income households.
I don't know.
Are you looking at more, we talked about income levels, you looking at more of that 30 to 60% range? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Well, yeah, my understanding is that there is concern in the community about the overall affordability of housing, especially for low to moderate income households. But there's a general concern about the affordability of housing. So I'm just trying to accentuate that.
Yeah, I guess I'm not. I guess I'm not comfortable with it because I don't think it's clear. I mean,
So
I don't
which
think
part- which
the
part is
last
not
part, the especially for low to moderate income households. To me, the low to moderate income households are the only households that we're looking at for affordable housing. We're not looking at
That's
affordable.
not true. You know,
We're not looking at
because-
affordable housing for high income households.
No, but when it's different. Like when you talk about people who are like 60% of the area median income, or you're talking about 80%, or you're talking about the very low income people, which is 30%. We haven't done anything for the very low income people. You know, we have not. Even the 10% or the 15% that we have it on our TIF policy and all this kind of policy is not considered for those the very low income. We
That's
need
not
to
what this
change the
says to
way.
me. That's not what this says to
It
me.
says especially for low to moderate incomes, which is going to include 50%, 30%, and all of them.
Depends on how you define it. I think these are very vague words. That's all I'm saying.
I think,
So that's why I wouldn't.
I think Susan makes a good point, because I think there are middle-income folks that perhaps, and you hear that, they can't even afford, say, a $300,000 or $350,000 home. So, you know, maybe you're saying maybe just a period after affordability of housing in Iowa City, period. So for all folks, making it affordable.
Yeah.
I think the important distinction here is there's a range when we're in, even when we're talking about affordable housing. You know, we start at 80% of area median income for home ownership opportunities, and we then go to 60% for rental. But on a number of our projects, we go below there. We have done some things, particularly on the LIHTC projects that we've supported. They go as low as 30% of the area median income. it is important what is in here, because the strategies and the cost of subsidizing housing at the 30% income level are very different than what they may be for the 60% or the 80% level. So particularly on the cost side, this does have meaning, but I think Susan's right. You need to define what you mean for low to moderate income.
And I think that should come when we actually modify the existing Affordable Housing Action Plan, not within the strategic plan. It should come within the plan, the Affordable Housing Plan itself, would be my recommendation.
Well, I don't want to make a big fight out of it, because I think we do understand basically what we're trying to do with this particular item. Rocky?
Well, I was just going to say, I know our consultant a lot of times went like the strategic plan language and what's sort of a detail of the strategic plan. I view that as sort of more of a detail and something that we'll work out through the modified process.
Okay, so we'll just put a period after Iowa City.
Okay.
All right, moving down to, what was it? 3C. Sorry, this may not be at all fruitful, but because there are two sub-elements below that, and they both have to do with the park plan or park action, I thought we could put in 4 parks this includes, just for clarity.
That's fine.
I'll wait till we go through years, and then I'll come back.
Okay. And let's see now, and then on 3D, I'm suggesting adding the words "for motorists, bicyclists, and pedestrians." And this has to do with safety of roadways. Yeah?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, seems like there's support for that. Moving down to item 5. Yeah, under collaborative problem solving, basically I'm suggesting changing the previous language to read, improve collaborative problem solving with governmental entities in the region on topics of shared interest.
I think that flows better.
The next one, 3, was it 5C? Yeah, I'm just rewording the original text here. So what I'm suggesting is improve, that doesn't work either. Improve relationships with members of the Iowa House and Senate by reaching out to legislators and other elected officials in eastern Iowa, as well as by working through city lobbyists.
It's all right.
I guess I would like to say throughout Iowa. It's a goal. I don't know that we're going to actually go out to Western Iowa, but that would be my preference. So,
My thinking was that it's a lot easier to reach out to legislators who live within reasonable distance of Iowa City, and we should start there.
Okay.
I mean, that's what my thinking was.
My only question with taking out state of Iowa is the issue of actually reaching out to the administration of the state. I suppose we can do that through our lobbyists, but we may have opportunities and want to at times reach out directly to the governor or other administrative staff on certain issues. And so I think it would be beneficial to leave in the state of Iowa, not just limit it to the legislature by saying Iowa House and Senate.
Could you be a little more precise? Because the state of Iowa is, this big thing that involves the
Well,
Department of Transportation.
But you know what? Depending on what it is, it might be the DNR. It might be, I don't even know all the state departments. I mean, it might be the Department of Education, because we have an issue that we want to talk to them about is we lobby for our local school district or something.
That's true.
So-
We just met with the Iowa DOT, so.
Yeah, it could be the
But
DOT,
don't
it could be-
doesn't the staff do that routinely with regard to all sorts of activities? And so what we're really talking about is
but I think
elected officials.
and I think we need to improve with the current executive branch, including the elected officials. I think that's a problem as far as I can tell.
Well, I think, because if I'm recalling correctly, the original intent was to kind of improve or show the real image of Johnson County and Iowa City, because it seems as though folks further out, even outside of our area, have a different opinion of us, or like we're our own little entity. And do things our way. So I thought it was the intent was for the entire state or other departments to improve our image or change our image. But
Well, if y'all like it the way it was, we'll just leave it the way it was. But I wanted to, I thought we could provide a little more precision.
I like it the way it was, except instead of state of Iowa, just the executive branch and legislature by reaching out.
Well, I'm okay with that. I don't, it's not something we should
Yeah.
deliberate about for a long time. So did you hear that, Ashley?
I've got it.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, on item 6A, yeah, so the last part of that sentence, I'm suggesting changing it to read, and ensure the next two budgets contain sufficient funds to facilitate achieving its goals.
sounds good.
Fine.
Item 6B, I didn't know what enhance efforts meant, so I thought support efforts might be a little more accurate.
Yeah.
On item 7A, I suggest deleting the words in the community. And in item 7B, deleting the words evaluate and just capitalize the verb consider.
Fine.
And in, was it 7C? I'll just read the revised version I'm recommending. Explore, explore expanded use of racial equity toolkit, within city government, embedding it within city departments and council levels.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, so, thank you. I guess we're okay with all that. But Susan, I know you had something you want to say, and then maybe the others had specific recommendations or requests or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's worth it tonight. I mean, it may be just when we vote on it. I've got concerns with certain things that are, and I'm in the minority with that, so I don't know if it's worth taking the time to go through that tonight. I will address it, though, in the formal meeting when we're ready to vote on it. I think there's some things in here that don't necessarily need to be in a strategic plan. I'm concerned under 3C that we've gone into the detail. I mean, we had to me, I thought a very minimal discussion about a plan for rubberizing putting in rubberized surfaces at the park playgrounds. We talked a little bit about the significant additional cost, and that what we're currently, while this may be better, what we're currently doing does meet ADA. And so I thought for a very minimal conversation, this was incredible detail to be putting into a strategic plan.
Well, maybe you should argue it should be deleted.
So, yeah, I would delete it. I've got a concern in here everywhere that we're ensuring that the next two budgets contain sufficient funds to do something, because we don't know what the budget's going to look like in 2 years, the next 2 years. We don't know what the backfill's going to be, and I think by putting it, I understand the intent that we really want to move forward with these things, but we also, to me, that's part of the budgeting process of looking at those priorities, and we theoretically could get to the point in those next two budgets that we're in such a crunch that we can't do those kinds of things. So I just, there's something about that language that, and it's in here in a number of places. And again, on 3C, the 3C2, Didn't take the time to go back and look at the Parks Master Plan in terms of developing strategies. I guess I'm not sure that I'm not sure that as a council that we have really agreed for a distribution of destination parks across our city. I mean, we have neighborhood parks, we have pocket parks, we have those. I really haven't heard us have that detailed conversation that we are committed to, quote, destination parks across the city, so I'm concerned about that language in here. I think this, particularly those two, I think take us beyond what we've had really significant conversation with.
Yeah, fair enough. I would suggest we do discuss those two tonight. All right, let's see if there are any other specific suggestions anybody has. Okay, well, I'm not hearing anything. So, all right, so Susan's suggesting that we delete 3C, I, and II, right? Yeah, and probably the 4 parks this includes also, those words. And you've already said why, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I think I have.
I think you're right. I think they are more detailed than this needs to be. My recollection about the Parks Master Plan is that it does identify equity gaps, and that to carry out that plan, staff would have to be addressing equity concerns. So I don't think it's necessary to include that. And I do not believe it's necessary to include in the strategic plan, considering a plan for rubberized surfacing at park playgrounds. So I would agree that I and II should be deleted, but maybe somebody else has a different view, so.
Well, those were two that I had raised. On the second item, if we were to say for the equitable distribution of parks within an easy and safe walking distance of all residents, I think that's fair to say. It's fair to say that that was in the master plan. So, so if all of you agree to that, then I understand we should have further discussion on the notion of destination parks, but the equity issue, I think, is an important piece of the master plan. So that would be my suggestion on that. On the rubberized surfacing, that could be something moved to some other list. I don't know that it needs to be.
Well, we've got our tentative work session list.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is a concern with with our parks, and I would add our school systems. It's an issue that really came to the surface with the schools.
Yeah, I don't object to having a further discussion. I just don't think this is.
So I think, I guess I'm happy to say yes, let's delete it and move it out of the strategic plan and onto another list for consideration.
That'd be fine.
Okay, so.
As long as we would continue to give some thought to the rubberized surfacing, because I really thought that we didn't take a lot of the time to discuss this. We talked about the cost, and then it was kind of nixed because it was expensive. But I think all in all, the overall cost would balance out because we could try one park at a time or something, and that's what I would like to do. But so as long as we would reconsider it, yes, perhaps this isn't the place for it.
Okay, so we're hearing that we want to move the item about rubberized surfacing to our tentative work session.
I
agenda
would
list.
suggest, we'll add it to the pending list. I would suggest you ask the Parks Commission for some feedback. And once we get that feedback, then you'd move to schedule it.
Yeah, that
But
sounds good.
I just don't want to hear that we're moving it because it's expensive and we don't know what the budget look like for next 2 years or whatever. If we are moving it because we want to look into it and try to see what we can do about this, or have some the Park and Rec, they can bring us some numbers and try to have a plan for, even if we try it in one park, not the whole, everything, that would be good. You can just take it away. But just take it because if it's expensive, no, I guess.
Yeah. I think the most important point is that the Parks Master Plan already contains a lot that it intends for the city to do. And
Sure.
so we probably don't need to pull this one item out and include it in the strategic plan. But we can
Yeah.
put it into that tentative list of work session topics.
Well, and that's why I would take number 2 out also, because we've emphasized in this strategic plan that we want to make progress towards completing the Parks Master Plan. And they gave us, kind of a timeline of getting some of those things done. Now, if we don't agree with that timeline, then I think we should go back and have a potential discussion with the Parks and Rec Commission and with staff about our issues with the timeline. And I assume that, and again, I'd have to go back and look at that detail, but I just don't think in a strategic plan, we need to get into the detail when we've already said we want to make significant progress on the Bicycle Master Plan and the Parks Master Plan. And I think that's enough detail there.
I think the key with this item is, because when you're talking about the equity gaps, I think you're talking about the need for additional park land in certain areas of town. And for those areas that are built out, that would require land acquisition. That's a much more involved process. Our budget doesn't set aside funds for us to go out and acquire parkland, say in the Central District, which has a noted deficiency of parkland. I think it would be appropriate for the strategic plan if your expectation is that we're going into those built-out areas and we're going to find land to purchase and convert to parkland, because that's a major undertaking that'll take a lot of staff time. Otherwise, we look to be opportunistic. We look for when a Chaddock Park property comes available, that we pounce on it and we get it and secure it. Otherwise, we're not going to make a whole lot of progress. So whether it's in here or not, we'll need that direction from you on how aggressive you want us to be to overcome some of those deficiencies that are noted in the Parks Master Plan.
So, John, you made a specific suggestion. Could you restate it, and then we'll find out if there's support for your suggestion?
Well, again, like the question of rubberized surfacing, I suggested this in part because I wasn't seeing it reflected in the CIP, so I wanted to bring attention to it. As long as we pick it up, I'm happy to see it disappear from the strategic plan. One other, just to mention, since Jeff mentioned some of the other ways this equity, question can be addressed, the plan also talks about joint use agreements with the school district, which was in the 1934 plan. So anyway, I mean, that would be the most cost-efficient way of doing it, and there are school sites that could, and that also applies to the rubberized surfacing. I know this could be a joint expenditure between the district and the city. So cost is an issue. So it seemed to me that would be one strategy, would be to for both the district and the city to address it.
Yeah, but you're surely right, but we're not going to address that tonight.
Since we got into the weeds a little bit,
Yeah.
but fine, let's pull it.
I think the question is this: do you want to create a new paragraph 3C that starts with the verb develop? Develop strategies to address the equity gaps noted in the Parks Master Plan and plan for the equitable distribution of parks within an easy and safe distance of all residents. Do you want that?
No, as I said, I think I think staff understands that is a concern. We can pull it from the.
All right, so I guess we're
strategic
clear
plan.
about that. Thanks, John. Anything else anybody wants to bring up with regard to the strategic plan?
The only other one I would have is the placement of 6B. Support efforts to increase the reach of the Parks and Recreation Foundation. I don't know, it just seems odd to me that's under promote environmental sustainability. I guess I would look at it more under foster healthy neighborhoods throughout the city, because by helping the Parks and Rec Foundation grow, I think that's going to do a lot of things in terms of helping improve some of our parks, maybe raising some more money for those. It might also be, kids participating in activities, which I think also helps foster healthy neighborhoods if our kids are doing good things. It just, I don't know, it just struck me as a little bit odd that we ended up with it under promote environmental sustainability. But it's not a huge issue, but I just thought it made more sense to be under healthy neighborhoods.
Because for record purposes, I would agree with that. It doesn't make sense under environmental sustainability.
Well, it could if we're talking natural areas, but I'm okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it does depend on what you're using the money for.
Sort of
so.
depends what, I think I could support it either way,
Yeah.
frankly.
Well, we have this natural management
Areas
areas
management.
plan that we're going to hear more about later on. So, so we could keep it, if we understand it that way, we could keep it in.
Okay, that's fine.
Just if people ask about it,
Yeah.
I think, having that idea that it could have gone either place. So.
Okay, seems to me we have a plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
So this will, I think we'll try to pull this together for your next agenda. It'll just be a resolution that you'll adopt the plan, and then we'll pretty it up and put it in a more presentable fashion down the road. The next step with this is to discuss the indicators that you want to help measure progress. And so in one of your next couple of information packets, we'll begin that process by suggesting some indicators to you, and then you can determine if those are sufficient or if you have other metrics in mind to measure progress on this plan.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, we can move ahead to IP number 10 in the February 16th info packet, 15. The one about Langenberg Avenue. Langenberg Avenue traffic control. I'll tell you what I think. I think we should follow the staff's recommendation.
I agree.
Persuades me. But I also think we should share the staff's memo with the residents who have expressed concerns in the past about traffic, et cetera, on Langenberg, if we can identify who they were. Kelly, I don't know if that's easy to do. I think she said it's easy. All right.
We can
So-
do it. You'll be inviting a conversation, and if that's what you want.
Well, I don't know. What do y'all think?
Well, I'll just, as I think I mentioned at our last meeting, in looking at the staff review on the second page, on the third paragraph of the second page, it's noted that the speed, volume, and collision data does not suggest there is a significant safety concern for motorists on Langenberg. And that my response to that was, that's good to hear. However, the other concern I have is with the residents. And so how do the residents feel about safety on Langenberg? We don't know. I guess I had kind of, for some reason, thought that there would be some reaching out to the residents to get an idea of what their concerns were with safety on Langenberg. And the other thing I would say is that, as we have discussed on Langenberg, this is much of the safety concerns on Langenberg are resulting from the fact that it is, I would say, a de facto arterial until we have McAllister Street. So and this was useful information in terms of, average daily traffic, which varied quite a bit from the two data points. But in any event, somewhere around, on average, 1,500 cars per day are traveling that corridor. I don't know what we would expect once McAllister is built, but it's probably 300 to 400 cars per day, perhaps. So we have a very significant disparity or difference between the level of traffic now and what it will be. So it seemed to me that provided an opportunity to frame this not as something that's a long-term concern, but a short-term concern. What can we do in the short term to address the safety concerns of the residents, whatever they may be. I don't know what they are. We haven't had that conversation with the residents, so I don't know. But it may be that they have a more refined understanding of where safety is a concern along that corridor. And I would, I don't know that I want to personally, insofar as we don't know what their concerns are, if I want to say what my thoughts are on the question related to always stop signs, because that's assuming that's what the residents will ask for, and I don't know what they will ask for. But it seems to me, especially insofar as this is a temporary condition, it provides an opportunity to try to listen to what the residents are concerned about and see what the remedies may be. And if there are concerns about, well, that doesn't conform to at least some of the concerns as raised under the discussion of solutions, such as with stop signs, that they may result in more rear-end collisions, motorists rolling through stop signs, higher traffic speeds downstream. They may, as I certainly have, some concerns as to whether those are accurate descriptions of what will happen with the potential possibility of putting in stop signs along that corridor, if that were something the residents were to raise.
I guess I would like to consider stop signs along with the resident input. As I've been able to observe over 2 years, sort of how we evaluate traffic control devices, obviously we have to have a standard set of criteria. Obviously staff goes to school for this, they're trained in that. But I do think that the criteria that we use are far too heavily weighted for automobiles. When we talk about performance of street corners or highways, we're always concerned about traffic flow and increasing the volume of traffic. And I think that we need to make sure that we have a standardized set of criteria for pedestrian safety, as well as taking into consideration the concerns of the neighborhood. That may make traffic more slow, but that I think is a goal. I would like to consider at some point a 20 is plenty in some of our neighborhoods, so our kids can feel safer. And if it slows down traffic and there's more queuing, that's actually the intended purpose. So I would like us, and I know, but staff needs to have some standardized set of criteria that they have to be able to apply. But I would like us to consider this in consultation with the residents.
I agree with that, because you mentioned we'd be inviting conversations as if that was a bad thing, but we have neighborhood meetings about other things, developments and zoning changes, and it was also made mention, as John said in the memo, that there were not significant safety concerns, but there were 3 traffic accidents in granted 10 years, but I don't think I've had a traffic accident on my street in 10 years. And are we also saying that it's okay to drive 26 to 32 miles per hour for that 15% that drove over the speed limit? I think we're sending the wrong message there, and it would be helpful to meet with the residents. And maybe, as you said, the 4-way stop signs wouldn't be what they'd want, but maybe there's something else they've got some ideas about, because there is a concern, I think, for little kids. I'm in that neighborhood quite often, and there's little kids riding their bikes on the sidewalks all the time, and they're not paying attention to traffic. So I think we need to take a better look at this.
Well, I just want to clarify things. I'm not suggesting it's bad to engage the residents. We have engaged the residents considerably over the last several years. The fact that there's speed bumps on here tells you that we went through a very detailed process with the residents to come up with a solution, and at that time speed bumps were the solutions. Now there's some residents, I don't know if it's all or not, that aren't happy with that. I can tell you, the counts and the observations that we've taken have shown that the speed bumps have helped a little. I'm not saying it's created a safe street, but it's helped a little. We've had officers spend considerable amount of time taking traffic speeds out there. They've documented all. I can give you reports on the times that they've spent out there and the speeds that they've observed. They are not showing alarming speeding numbers. Now, is that because they're visible and people are slowing down and anticipating? Perhaps there's some of that, but generally when we're sitting out there, we'll and there's a speeding problem, we'll identify it, and it'll result in tickets being issued. That hasn't been the case here. All I'm suggesting is if you want us to engage the neighborhood again and have a conversation, we're more than happy to do that. We do that all the time. That's our job. I'm just suggesting that the solutions here are limited. We can put in stop signs even though they're not warranted, as long as we accept that liability and some of the concerns that we have with doing that, that's fine. But until McCollister's built, there's not a whole lot that we can do. So I'm just nervous that we might be creating some false hope for residents with engaging them, saying, let's figure this out, because the solution is to get McCollister through there. We're happy to do it. We can paint stripes down the road. We can try to narrow the road visually through stripes. We can put in stop signs. We can do a number of things, but I think until you get McCollister through, you're not going to achieve the results that you really want to.
When I look at the data and the speed numbers and how that has gone down from 2015 to 2017, and I agree with what you're saying, Pauline. I mean, and I don't know how fast the 15% are going, that are, in that, above that 85th percentile. But those are pretty darn reasonable numbers when you're getting your 85th percentile is either below the speed limit or just 1 mile an hour above the speed limit. The vast bulk of your traffic has slowed down. And the fact with the parking, that helps. The speed bumps help. I'm just really concerned if we have a traffic calming program. And if we start deviating from that and or putting in stop signs where they're not warranted based on the data, I guess I would ask you, Jeff, if we start putting in traffic control measures that are not warranted by the data, what is the city's liability?
Sue's office would have to defend any claims on that. I don't know, because I've never.
I don't think it's a path we want to start down. I really don't. Not just from the liability standpoint, but I think just from the demand that you potentially start getting from other neighborhoods from their perception. And everybody's perception is different in terms of what makes, a safe or comfortable neighborhood in terms of the traffic or pedestrians or bicyclists.
Well, I do think this is one of the issues that the conversation would hopefully give us enlighten us with respect to what is a safe speed. And this is why I had raised, and it didn't make it into the strategic plan, but for residents typically view the speed in their neighborhood to be safe when it's hovering more around 20 miles per hour than 25. So right there's a 5 mile per hour difference in terms of the perception of safety between the driver and the resident. And then, as we've mentioned, the 85th percentile speed means there are 15 vehicles out of 100 that are driving faster than that speed. We don't know what that range is. No. Let's say a driver is going 30 to 40 miles per hour through an intersection along Langenberg, and a child tries to cross the street, or a vehicle tries to pull out into Langenberg. That could result in a collision. Mm-hmm. So without knowing what the 95th percentile speed, in other words, they're roughly 1 out of 7 cars going faster than the speed we know to be 26 or 27 miles per hour or less. So again, the other thought I had on this was this should be a temporary issue. I'm expecting that once McCoppin goes in and traffic goes down to what we'd expect it to be, the concerns in the neighborhood will be significantly diminished than what they have now. So in terms of what this means in a global picture, I think we have a way of framing it to say This is a unique situation. We have a local street in a residential neighborhood which is seeing 3 to 4 times the level of traffic it would normally expect to see. So it's already differentiated from whatever standards and approach we would take in a more normal situation.
Yeah, I continue to think we should follow the staff's recommendation, but I think you're right about that point. I mean, we should acknowledge it is a unique situation, and so maybe that demands a unique response. But right at the moment, we have 2 people supporting the staff's recommendation and 3, I think, opposing it. Mazir, do you have an opinion?
I really agree with John. We need to sit down with, just to consult the resident as the residents, their opinions, and find out exactly what they are worried from. And because, like, the officer to sit there and take down the speed limit, just by if I saw the officer, I would slow down automatically because he's there. Even if I'm really going with the speed limit, because as soon as I see him, I will look at my speed and everything to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Just let us. Yeah, that's the nature. And I guess we need to consider the residents on this decision,
Okay,
before we can make
I think
anything.
I'm hearing 4 people in favor of having further consultation with the neighbors. Okay, move on to February 22nd, to that packet. With regard to IP number 2, affordable housing shortage expected to worsen under new tax law, I want to just say it really pretty irritated me to read that the White House's budget, in its own words, quote, devolves responsibility to state and local governments, which are better positioned to assess local community needs and address unique market challenges. I think local governments are better positioned, but the federal government has a whole bunch of money, and it raises taxes, and their words, in my judgment, are yet another instance of dissembling. I really wish some people would tell the truth about what they're doing. Sorry, I'm getting on a rant here. Shouldn't do that. So, anybody else have anything to say about that information packet?
Would concur with your comments on IP2. Just would encourage people to look at IP3, the I-80 planning study. People can go to www.iowadot.gov/interstate study. Again, that's www.iowadot.gov/interstate study. Look at what they're doing and their study and their public meetings on changes to Interstate 80. I think it's really important as we look at more restrictive budgets as time goes on, and as the DOT looks at adding lanes and doing other things to some of our interstates within the state, how we're going to pay for those and where that money's coming from and how we're going to maintain those, I think is really important. I've mentioned this before. I think spending $400 million to redo the I-80, 380 interchange is absolutely ridiculous. Reduce the speeds. Cleveland does it for 90-degree turns in Interstate 80 going through the city. So I think as a general public, I think we have to start paying more attention to what the Iowa DOT is doing and planning.
Agreed. Can we move on to the March 1 packet? IP5 pending work session topics. Jeff and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, and I don't know if we've specified anything for our next meeting yet, have we? That you know of, Jeff?
No, we have not.
Yeah, so one thing we need to do is review the list of possible work session topics, because we have a mighty long list, and we can't really deal with that. We have to shorten it. So maybe we could do that our next meeting?
Sure.
You okay with that?
Sure.
Nope.
Also, I would really like to reach out to the Graduate and Professional Students Association or group to discuss their proposal about having a student liaison. We've deferred that now for several months. I'd like to take care of that, and before the school year ends and they go where they need to go. So
Would you like us to invite them to have a
Yeah,
discussion
if
with
we
you
can
at the
do
work
that,
session?
I think that'd be great. You all okay? Yeah, apparently everybody's okay with that. All right.
One thing on the work session topics, it was kind of triggered by our discussion of Foster Road, and Jeff mentioned, not at this meeting, but at our last meeting, what the road profile for that design would be. And what it caused me to think about was, the question was sort of put to us, and I thought, well, another group that I'd be very interested in knowing what their take is on the proposed road design would be the bicycle community. And that caused me to think about the bike master plan. And so I was looking at the bike master plan, and in that plan, it did talk about policies and regulations related to the plan itself. And one thing that was brought up was, under their recommendations, was the creation of a standing bicycle advisory committee.
All right.
So that kind of struck me as, that would, again, asking the user of the facility what their thoughts are in terms of proposed roadway sections. That seemed to be a reasonable idea.
We sort of already do that informally, don't we? I mean, there are Think Bicycles advocates that consult with staff. I mean, don't we already sort of do that, Jeff?
Either we are in the process of creating that committee or it's already been established. We had an informal group of people,
Yeah.
yes, over the last couple of years that have been meeting. I don't know that the intent was to necessarily run road designs by them, but was more to keep them informed of the progress we're making towards the master plan and let them inject new priorities that may come up or give us some advice on some trouble areas in the community. But I'd have to check with Kent whether that group's established.
Because I talked to a few people, and to their knowledge, that committee had not been formed or created. And the other thing that was in the plan was something that I had raised, and that is, the NACTO recommendation, their guidelines for bicycle connectivity in urban areas. Their recommendations were recommended in the master plan as something that the city should consider adopting.
So in other words, this would be something that we need to talk about, that item number 5, in terms of where we want to schedule it, or give staff more direction or whatever. I'm just looking at all the things on here, not trying to get into the detailed discussion of the items tonight.
No, I just wanted that these were a couple of items, just to inquire about the status on the committee, and then, if we were to adopt the NACTO, I would think that would go through a work session process.
Yeah, Ron, do you have any thoughts on that, on those standards? And I know you're looking through SUDAS now.
The SUDAS standards or design guide calls out NACTO as one of the guides to look to for design of trails and bicycle facilities.
The SUDAS standards?
So, yeah, so it's already identified as a reference within the standards themselves. Just as the AASHTO Green Book for roadway design, there's other pieces of reference documents that are included in the design guides for those, for that piece of it. So NACTO is already called out as one of those reference documents.
Oh, in the SUDAS?
In the SUDAS standard, correct, yeah.
Okay.
I would say for number 5, it's probably important to have that conversation sooner rather than later. We'll be getting into McAllister design this year.
Yeah, we should
American
get on
Legion,
it.
we've already done some functional design for, so that's probably one, as you look at this long list, that we should schedule pretty soon.
Yep. Okay.
So maybe we'll put that on the, not your next meeting, but the one after.
Do any of you have other items on the March 1 info packet?
IP 13 with the Gloria Dei Lutheran Church and the historic structure. I did read the memo. They've just sort of left it open in terms of Friends of Affordable Housing, Friends of Historic Preservation, let's be late, are going to move the structure, or can we have a little bit more detail, Jeff, in terms of sort of where we are at this point?
Yeah, so the
It wasn't
church
totally
is-
clear from the memo.
Yeah, the church has basically withdrawn their proposal to move the home to the Jefferson Courtyard, and they have instead pledged to work with
50,000
anybody
or-
interested in preserving the structure to move it. So they would help pay for the move, as would the university. That's part of the purchase agreement there. It's really up to the community, city included, to find a suitable location for that home. So at a staff level, we have already been discussing some potential locations for it, for the building, and we'll sit down with representative of the Historic Preservation Commission and Friends of Historic Preservation to get their thoughts too. But I think it's really going to be on us. We're going to have to be a part of the solution to save the building.
Okay.
I should also tell all of you that I wrote a letter to Gloria Dei, to Pastor Dykstra, and forgotten the other, Jane, I can't remember her last name. I wrote it and just sent it yesterday, acknowledging receipt of what they sent and thanking them in a variety of ways. I didn't bring a copy of it with me, but I just wanted you to know that I responded. Other items in this agenda packet or information packet? I have 3 or 4 to mention. So IP number 5, responding to black parents.
I mean 6.
Huh?
6.
Is it 6? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So as the memo that Pauline and I wrote indicates, she and I met with 8 black parents on February the 12th. And there's an attachment to that memo that Ashley put together for us that details what we heard that night from the parents. And I found it to be quite a stimulating conversation. And so then the memo tries to distill what we heard down to a few key points. It doesn't say we should do. Pauline and I were not saying in that memo we should do 1, 2, 3, or certain items, but we did identify what we took to be 4 key suggestions that we heard from the parents. So the question for us basically is, us being the council, is should we put this on our list of work session topics, or is there interest in moving forward on the parents' suggestions more quickly, or what? And maybe you want to add something to this.
Some of the suggestions, and here we've had this lengthy discussion over months now of the budget, and that had some items that perhaps would involve some budgetary items, securing a building, hiring someone, counselors or youth service workers kinds of folks. So I don't know where we would go with that or how we would add those kinds of items into our budget yet. Because they were some very good suggestions, and the idea about and how we could maybe recruit the Boys and Girls Clubs. I've always thought that would be a good idea, or that we have some sort of YMCA or YWCA here, but how we would go about drawing them to the community here. If anybody has suggestions.
Big Brothers,
Well,
Big Sisters.
I've been to Cedar Rapids and met with the Boys and Girls Club up there, and they would love to come to Iowa City.
I think it would be great if we could pursue
Yeah,
that
and
somehow.
Jeff and I have had, and Pauline, we had some conversation about this last week. And it seems there are some things we can do, but I don't know that we can respond to all the key elements that they identified without actually incorporating it into a budget, or, certainly thinking through it more. So I can say, let's put it on our list of pending work session topics.
I think we should.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're trying to sort of cut it down,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think in terms of being responsive, working with them, these are some common sense solutions. We got to find room for it. So Put it on the list.
And they were so enthusiastic and so thankful and thoughtful.
They were
that
great
I'd
and
love
really,
to follow up with them.
really very helpful. Okay.
I mean, I know that and this came up at the town hall at Grant Wood, this comment of there's not a lot for the kids to do.
We
I'd
heard
be
that
interested in
loud and clear.
our recreation staff, perhaps, what would be their response to that question or that comment of not having a lot to do? I mean, that's one that really sticks out at me.
I think what I heard from the parents was there's not really a lot to do other than to go to Mercer or the Lee Recreation Center or just be out on the streets when the weather's nice. But there's no place to go and just be. And the other two places, Mercer and the Lee Center, what I heard them say was they're too controlled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's no place to go to just kind of be as with some supervision, but be.
Yeah, I think it was like, they termed it restrictive, and they said, the kids need a place to socialize. If they go and they hang out downtown, then they get questioned by, what are you doing here? Vagrant kind of thing, hanging out on the streets, are you up to something? Or hanging out, they can't really hang out at the rec center, so to speak, or at Mercer Park. So they wanted a place where they could go to socialize, have like a dance, or listen to music, or do their homework, and on that, and on those lines, have someone there that could help them with their homework kinds of thing, get that done.
In the discussion, and I think we need to do this as a work session, but just real quickly, in their discussion, did you sense that they were addressing a certain age group?
I think the answer is teenagers.
Teenage,
Is that
like
what you thought?
14 to 18 kind of age range, I think, probably.
All right, let's put on the work session. We don't need to talk about it more tonight. But
We talk about IP8.
which one, IP8?
IP8, yes.
The federal aid swap, is that what it is? Yeah. Yeah.
Position on that, or what we doing?
Well, when I read Bill Gerhardt's note or whatever that he sent us, I thought, well, that's all pertaining to a law that was being considered when he wrote it, and therefore is irrelevant to the question at hand for us. Should we do a swap?
How so? I didn't get that at all, Jim. Why do you think
Well,
it's
so
irrelevant?
maybe I misunderstood it, but what he was, so I understood that he was directing the question, or making the points with regard to a law. So then one of the points was the law would undermine rural construction workers' wages who construct secondary roads and bridges. I don't see how that would be affected by what we do what the MPO would do with regard to the swap. Maybe it does, but I don't see it.
What I got from him is that he felt several different things. Is that I think he met with all of us at least. Have you guys met with him yet?
Many times.
He
but not
showed
about
me
this just
the
now.
wage scales that he had there, and I think he was of the opinion that even here, without the Davis-Bacon, that you couldn't necessarily expect those level of wage scales. And he also talked about the extra staffing. Some of those staffing are federal regulators to ensure that you're not misclassifying the different types of people that are subject to that wage scale. And he did have concerns about the impact that this would have, I think, in terms of lowering the minimum wage for highway construction workers. So I've encouraged them. For our March 28th meeting, I'm anticipating a healthy turnout there. I mean, he's read the staff memo. I also encouraged him to get feedback from his, the lawyer that had come before, so he can sort of make a direct response to that. But he was just as passionate now as he was 6 months ago. I mean, it's essentially we're the minimum wage for the construction industry. And so he was still very passionate about it. I think in terms of the rural issue, that's an issue. But I think that there are rural people in terms of the MPJOC, correct? We do have rural areas, correct, or not?
No, not with what we are. Ours is urbanized.
Yeah, well, I mean, he felt it would depress where we're at here, was my impression.
Yeah, and that's basically what he conveyed to me, too, because I started my conversation with him of saying, I see myself sitting here as an Iowa City city councilor needing to represent Iowa City. And his whole memo was focused on the impact that he saw this having in the rural areas. Well, if they decide to do the swap, we have no control over that. So if the MPOJCs or ECOG type, across the state decide to do the swap, then we don't control that. They can do the swap, and they'll end up being able to get rid of their federal money and take state money and not be under Davis-Bacon. And so then he did. He went on and talked the same thing you said, Rockne, about he really feels that it could potentially, affect the construction wages that are paid here, the lack of certified payrolls, et cetera, that
More
that
out
you-
of state, I think you
yeah,
felt?
that you have to have under the Davis-Bacon, et cetera. So I told him I would support his position. I'm concerned about it. I think the idea I'm not as convinced as he is necessarily that it would lower wages here. I think the demand, but I told him I would support his position on this point. So I'm just.
I think we needed to have a healthy discussion since it is going to come before the MPO again very soon. So we as a group need to understand going into it how we might influence the rest of the group to make a decision on this, because it needs to be decided by April or
does.
so to affect
Yeah, at our next
in the
meeting.
October plan. So we need to, and I have some concerns, same concerns. I also talked to Bill and about the wages and bypassing some sort of federal regulations to make the job cheaper, which I don't think that's a very good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Yeah, and I think it's the result at the end will be a really better project if we give wages and include the environmental. Also, the federal regulation is good to have it because it will result in better project, and I think that. But
I think with the regulations, I'm not as concerned about those because I think Iowa City has pretty stringent regulations on a lot, like the environmental stuff and those sorts of things. But
this is not only affecting
no,
Iowa City.
No, but the MPOJC is only affecting the urbanized. It's Coralville, North Liberty, Iowa City. It's just the urbanized area in terms of the federal dollars that we would get and potentially swap out.
Sure.
You'll have a DOT representative at the MPO meeting on the 28th to answer some questions, if you have questions on how it would work and what the response has been in other MPOs throughout the state.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other items on the March 1st info packet?
No.
I did not read all the pages of House Study Bill 138.
I think it was.
I did.
You read the whole thing?
I skimmed it.
Pretty sure.
I tell everybody you do your homework.
Well, I knew why it was there, and I skimmed, and then I found the Barber stuff, and I'm like, Kingsley, why did you put this 20-page House Study Bill in our packet? I wish he was here tonight. I'd give him a hard time. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're done with the March 1st packet. Is that correct? Okay, council updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committees. We can start with Rockne and move to his left, which would mean you would be next, Leslie.
Well, this is the Transportation Council meeting. I wanted to bring up, we've been getting a lot of notices from the Iowa Department of Transportation relating the expansion of 380. We've brought up that to 6 lanes. We've discussed that in the past, and I think the consensus of council is that, hey, it doesn't take a weatherman to know which way the wind is blowing on this. I think the DOT wants to do it. That's the direction they want to do it. They want to go. What impact are we going to have, if any, on that decision that they likely will make and spend, tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers to support that. But I did reach out to Jim because I think that we should note or consider, whether it's through a letter by Jim, our mayor, or through a resolution, that we do oppose it. I am categorically opposed to this. I don't think it's an esoteric issue. I think it's a major issue because if we're talking about transportation. We're talking about reducing greenhouse gases. We're talking about reducing sprawl and land use in the environment. That comes down to a sensible, balanced approach to transportation policy. And I think that with this decision, it's just giving in. It's when you're putting on weight to buy bigger pants. That's not what you do. I think it's going to be very hard when we're talking about the transportation study for the railroad. We're making it that much easier to use the automobile. And I think what that will do is that will encourage additional development and put even greater pressure on that. So I would like us to either consider a resolution or have our mayor lodge a formal, if we have council support, lodge a formal objection to it and say we are opposed to it, because I think this is terrible policy. We're just giving in to a totally carbon-centric automobile transportation network, and I think it's not good policy. So I think we should lodge that in. So I don't know if the council, if we need a separate work session. I think right now it just may be a letter. I think Jim knows what the issues are, and they may get the letter and say, so what, we're going to do it anyway. But I think certain issues you sort of have to take a stand. You have to articulate what your values are, and they've solicited input, and so this is part of that process of giving them input.
So, clarifying question here.
Yeah.
Are you talking about I-80 or I-380?
I-380. We got the I-80
all
thing
being
tonight.
widened, it's kind of hard to keep track.
Yeah, and I think the same thing could be said for I-80 as well, but I think it was about a week or two that we got the notice from Department of Transportation, at least my recollection on I-3, and it could be confusing with I-80. But I do think that we should respond as a council to that and articulate clearly what our position is on that, either through a letter or through a resolution, rather than just sort of say they're going to do it one way or another.
So before we talk about this more, I want to toss a fact into the mix, which I have shared with Rockne, and that is, I want to remind you that John, Jeff, and I met with Senator Joe Bokum and 3 DOT officials back on January the 26th. And in that meeting, we learned of at least 3 very promising actions that the DOT will be rolling out. One has to do with stronger support for van pooling and carpooling. Second has to do with express bus transit, which is going to start in the fall, if I remember rightly, Jeff. That's the idea anyhow. And the third is much stronger promotion and marketing of both of those alternatives. So, John, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I thought we sensed that was really promising to hear that they're doing those things, but they also intend to widen the road. So I just wanted to make sure y'all were aware of that meeting and the basic information we obtained from them at that meeting. So do y'all have thoughts about Rockne's suggestion?
I don't have a problem with our sending a letter. I think you're probably right, Rockne. I think the decision's pretty well done with 380. But, and again, they're taking land on the outside so they can put the 4th lane on the inside later on. So they get the land before somebody's developed it or built on it. They've absolutely said that de facto is why, because people asked, why aren't you putting that 3rd lane on the inside, take up the median? And they said, well, because if we do that, by the time we get ready to do the 4th lane, people will have developed right up to the borders and they won't have room. I guess I would say if we do it in the form of a letter, I think one of the things that really needs to be emphasized is the financial aspect of this long term. Some people don't care about, don't believe in the whole carbon issue. I mean, I'm not saying you don't mention it, but I think more people relate to the financial aspect of what this is costing us. And the fact that the easier it is to use the car, the less, as we've all talked about here before, the less congestion there is, then the easier it is for people to hop in their car and go. There's not the incentive for people to use, van pools or express buses or anything else. But where we're headed is just not, this is what I ran on this past time, is sustainability, including financial sustainability, and just adding lanes and having to plow them and repave them is not financially sustainable. It's just draining such a huge part of our financial resources.
Yeah, as Jim said, we met with DOT staff, and I did prepare a response. Sort of, they're asking for comments, and the three themes that I addressed in my my concerns were environmental, economic, and safety. So I think it is important to explain, what it is we're opposing, and why. And it is very interesting that, this is one of the clear ways in which this can be addressed. If we're not saying there isn't congestion or future congestion. I think, in my view, the issue is how do we address that congestion in a way in which we optimize the use of the interstates? And in my view, and in many others' view, the use of the interstates has not been optimized because it's a free good. There is simply, unlike when you book a flight, right, when you book a flight on an airplane, if you go at peak season, you're going to pay a premium. The same thing could be applied to the interstates. If you know that you get on the interstates during commute hours, you're going to have to pay a premium. And so there are ways in which you can distribute the use of the interstates to better maximize the use before you make the decision to widen it. So it isn't, in my view, that's the best way to frame it, is that we're just simply not optimizing the use of what we have, and that any future expansion should be based on optimization before we leap to providing more capacity.
So am I right in understanding that this topic comes before the MPO board at its next meeting? Is that right?
The swap does.
Swap does, but not this?
I don't
Or has it
know.
already been discussed in the MPO board?
But I don't think we have any decision.
I don't think there's a decision.
No.
I think
Just discussed it.
Yeah.
All right, so what I'm thinking is you could authorize me to write a letter to the MPO board? Is that the right, I got to be clear about who to write to.
I was thinking the Department of Transportation, Iowa Department of Transportation in Des Moines.
I'm not sure, I just don't recall if their formal public comment period is still open or where that stands. I mean, even if it's not open, it doesn't preclude you from writing a letter. But we can figure that out if there's a public hearing opportunity or if you just want to write a letter. I would, as a courtesy to your neighbors who may share your views or may not share your views, I would let them know what your stance is so that they're not surprised or hearing about it from different sources.
A copy of the letter to the MPO board or to the mayors?
At a minimum, yeah.
Well, I think Jeff is saying maybe even talk to the mayors ahead of time before you send it, or possibly.
And you may want to engage in that discussion at the MPO and see if they'd support you. It's going to be a more powerful advocacy piece if it's supported by the MPO, multiple cities instead of one. I don't think you'll get there because I don't know that the other councils would share your view, but I think it would be appropriate to have that discussion at a regional level too, so that everybody knows where you stand. And again, they may join you, they may not.
All right, so I'm thinking I would write a letter to the DOT with connections to the other people you just described, expressing our objections to the proposed widening of I-380, praising the DOT's 3 forthcoming actions, and call for more thoughtful integration of transportation and land use planning at the regional scale.
Yep.
All right. I might need some help from the staff on this, Jeff.
Sure.
Any other, no, we have to, you started us on this, didn't you?
It's my fault.
John, is there anything you
No, I
need to
have
bring up?
no updates.
Susan?
The steering committee for the Access Center is still meeting. I think we continue to make progress looking at potentially hiring a project manager who would kind of take over some of the day-to-day nitty-gritty in terms of, I've learned so much on this. There's certain licensure issues depending upon the services they're going to be provided and how that impacts reimbursement from Medicaid, and there's all different kinds of things. So somebody who understands more of that and can kind of pull some of those pieces together. So having that discussion. lots of, conversations between the various organizations still and trying to get some things, to some next steps. So not a whole lot to report other than I feel optimistic that we're continuing to make progress, but hopefully more to come soon.
Is North Liberty going to be contributing?
I do not believe that they have budgeted anything in their 2019 budget for the capital costs, so that was a discussion at our last meeting. We hope to get them on board for the future.
Okay. I was going to say, are we going to request a joint meeting with them?
No, but we do hope to get them on board for the
Okay.
future.
Okey-doke. Pauline?
Had my first meeting with the ECI-COG, the East Central Iowa Council of Governments, on Thursday, the 22nd of February. Mostly, we spent a lot of time just going around the room with introductions because a lot of folks were new to the group. We had a brief discussion on the federal SWAP program. It seemed like the folks in the room didn't have a lot of information on it. There were a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. We did have then, most of the meeting was a presentation by Antonio Arenas from the Iowa Flood Center here at the University of Iowa. He gave a PowerPoint on data and information regarding flooding and watershed projects. And it was really very interesting. If our work session agendas weren't so packed full, I would think it'd be a really great PowerPoint for us to visit, because Johnson County had benefit from a lot of the federal aid monies, both from the 93 flood and the 08. So very interesting. That's it.
Nice.
I was really looking forward for my first meeting with CIT Paratransit, but unfortunately, I marked it on my calendar, ready for it, but I just had the death on the family, and on the 27th was the funeral and the same time of the meeting. I guess I sent email of Leah and asked for the minute. Maybe when I get the minute, I can update you. Yeah.
Good deal. All right, I have nothing to report about the CVB or the Partnership for Alcohol Safety, but I want to make one last comment before we end. We adopted a budget tonight with the CIP. We defined the final elements of our strategic plan tonight, and we gave the staff guidance about the annexation policy. This is good work. Congratulations to everybody. I think we're done with our work session.
We did?
Great. Thank you.
Great. Okay.